Word. Okay, so we've got almost everyone doing something. We've got a few undergraduates that are not quite there yet, but everyone else is doing a pretty good job. We're having a little bit of confusion with some people on getting the formats properly, but other than that, everyone that's on this call and everyone in the graduate class seems to be moving. So keep up the good work. I know it can be discouraging, so we just have to keep trying. Some of you, I'll try to help you individually because there is a few issues of confusion on some of these details. I think the biggest problem is this reinvestment rate, and I've actually posted under the webinars a spreadsheet that shows you what it looks like. And some of you I've actually forwarded to you, but you really need to look at these things. And again, I'm trying to get these things on YouTube, so I should have them up by next week, and I'll just kind of label them by date and maybe put the chapter or the homework kind of relevance for them so you can kind of sync yourself. But in general, it's following the syllabus. The other problem I'm having is some of you seem to be confused on what problems are assigned. So when you actually go to the syllabus, I want to point out that assignment 3 is on chapter 1. It's not on chapter 3. So you need to make sure that you check that assignment 1, you do the right problems, because some of you are doing assignment 3 and you're doing the wrong problems because somehow you're thinking more are assigned than are. So check the syllabus, because we have a problem that chapter 1 is really covered in assignment 3. And I think some people are now looking at chapter 3 and thinking it's different assignment than what it was. So keep an eye on that. I won't penalize you if you want to work harder, but if you're all of a sudden in the middle of assignment 3 or assignment 4 and you're like, wow, I don't know what these problems are talking about because she never talked about it, probably got the wrong questions that you're answering. And it's just the book assignments. The homeworks are straightforward. I talk about them directly. And we are now at the point where I'm going to give chapter 5 lecture again today. I gave it yesterday. I gave it some of it last week because it's hard. It's all from chapter 5. Yesterday, I kind of went through my overview, and now we're going to go through the problems in the book. So here's what you need to do. When you're reading these problems, whether it's the homework or the assignment, you try to find something in the book that's an example. Like, oh, gee, it's talking about tariffs. Oh, how do I account for a tariff when I calculate price? Oh, gee, it's talking about minimum wage. How do I account for valuing the cost of labor when there's a minimum wage law? And we're going to go over it again today. So I know it's a little confusing because it is kind of difficult economics. So that's why we're covering it again today. And the ticket really is to do 2 things. One, find a similar problem in the book so you can read how to do it and just follow their example. Minimum wage is in there. Tariffs and subsidies are in there, right? So when it says, what's the price if there's a tariff, it tells you in the book how to get that price by simply looking at that tariff and calculating the relationship to the price that observed in the market. We're going to talk more about it today. The second thing to do is look at the FAQ. On the frequently asked questions, I actually point you right to the page numbers with some of these answers because, again, we're practicing. If you to really do this, to really estimate some of these demand curves is kind of difficult. So, again, I'm just trying to get you a flavor of what you're dealing with when you're doing these cost-benefit analysis. For the graduate students, I'm working with most of you on projects. For the undergraduate students, you're kind of done. This is your last chapter. So this week, I'm going to finish chapter 5. Next week, we will have one thing on Tuesday of what does a presentation look like if you're presenting a benefit cost analysis so that you can get a handle on what does this really mean. Because some of you are getting so either lost in these Excel files or lost in some interpretation that I want to give you an example of what a finished product might look like and what you're really kind of overviewing it because we're now heading into the project stage for the undergraduates. So that's why I want to get you started on that. And for the graduate students, that webinar will be recorded. So I'm going to keep on lecturing to finish off the graduate students. I've reduced my trip to China, so I'm only going to be gone a week, so we'll have plenty of time. We have a lot of students. Some of you are doing very well, very far advanced. Others are still kind of confused in the beginning. So we'll get there. So we're going to now go to the share, go to the PowerPoint. I'm going to try a different approach. This time, I'm not going to put it on the screen share thing. I'm just going to do it like this. Because I put it on the screen share, we get all these problems. And I notice I don't have it if I don't go to that screen share. I tried to do it today and I froze my whole machine. Okay, so you notice now that I'm really functioning directly out of the book. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I think you're getting confused when you're trying to read it. Why are you trying to read it? Because I've just told you, you get the problem that I assign, and then you start searching through this chapter looking for the relative example that is exactly like the question in the end of the chapter. So we're going to go through some of these so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we go. So again, what are we doing here? This is really the efficiency benefit cost analysis. In chapter 4, we talked more about how you actually get the private one done. In chapters 2 and 3, we're kind of mostly just looking at project benefit cost analysis. We didn't have a lot of limiting particular assumptions. We just started worrying about what was the right discount rate, how do you lay out the problem. Then we kind of went back to chapter 1 where he said, okay, so we did the project one. We kind of understand discounting. Now we got these 3 other points of view. Private, which we talked about in chapter 4. Efficient, which we're talking about in chapter 5. And then the last one is the community one. And that really starts in chapter 6, how it's distributed through the community. We talked a little bit about it in chapter 1, if it's in the community or out of the community. That's the only distribution we've covered so far. You're either getting the stuff in the community or the money from the project is flowing out of the community. So it's either an in or an out. But if we want to do sustainability, we have to look at distribution within the community. So that's what we'd be doing in chapter 6. So the undergraduates can stay with us if they want, but if not, it'll be myself and the graduate students because it's a more complicated topic. So again, efficiency benefit cost analysis, we're not looking again in economics about social equity. We're not looking at distributional things. What we're looking at is, are we using our resources efficiently? We want our resources throughout the entire world to move to their highest and best use. What we really think in economics and in markets is those resources will move to the area where they're most highly valued, and they'll automatically get those signals because people that want to use those resources will be offering the money to attract them. And they can afford to offer that salary to those resources until the benefits from using those resources is kind of maxed out relative to what the community wants. If I don't value those resources, if I don't value Kmart's, they kind of go away. And it's not necessarily a sad thing because if we valued them, we would be shopping there. If we're not shopping there, we don't value them. And so we vote with our dollars. And the people that sell us goods and services when we're voting with our dollars are always trying to make decisions based on our voting. So that's why we really like markets. It allows us to all vote with our dollars and those suppliers to go back and figure out what's the most, because they're going to be efficient and effective in what they're trying to do. They're not going to waste resources per se. They may inadvertently mess some of them up because they're not really being forced to keep them clean. If you force them to keep them clean, they will. So that's kind of really what's going on, is we're really looking at how those resources are being used and are they being used the most effectively and as efficiently as we can possibly get them used. So again, we're talking about efficient resource allocation when we're talking about efficiency benefit cost analysis. And that means we're now in the economics world. We left finance behind. That was just project analysis. We've left accounting behind. That was really private benefit cost analysis. And now we're just looking at efficiency. And trust me, I know it's confusing. So again, if the net benefit is positive, then that is going to be better than one that's negative. How much better it is not something we're really discussing too in depth here. We're just simply saying it's better. And anywhere that a resource moves into and produces a positive net benefit, the world is better off. It's Pareto preferred. So we got that lingo down. So again, the distribution of the benefits of the project is not really what we're talking about. Again, we have this set distribution that we've discussed, the private, the public, and the general public. So that's from the project, but we're not really looking at that here. We're just trying to figure out how do we value these resources when we do our net benefits. So let's just kind of remember our methodology, because we had our famous with and without approach. So it's very important that we remember that, because some of us, when we're doing our college example, are not understanding that what we're valuing is with college versus without college, right? So when we're looking at with college versus without, then what's the difference in the benefits of those two? The college produces how much more a year in benefits? So what's the addition of adding college? Not what's the total benefit you get without college. And some of you are messing this up. You're not really understanding this opportunity cost concept. So again, when you're dealing with economics, you're saying, oh, well, if I do that, then I give up the benefits from that. That's what you're thinking. I'm giving up this $55,000 of not working. But if you go to college and you start working, you're also getting benefits from that. So you're netting out the with college amount that you're getting over and above without. So again, we have the options of you undertake the project, we move through the college example, what resources are allocated to it, what's the value of the output, the value of the college earn. And then you get the actual project benefit of going to college. If you don't go to college, which is not what I was asking what if you do? But if you don't, then it would be doing that side also. But we didn't need to do that. We just needed to do the with college example. So again, you're always doing a with and without. And because you have two alternatives, it lets you identify these opportunity costs. And we'll talk more about that on Tuesday when I present an actual project analysis, so you can see what this is. Okay, here we go. So the biggest problem we have is valuing the outputs and the inputs. How do you value them? How do you get wage rates for jobs that you get going to college? This is not an easy thing. In these problems, I've been handing it to you, right? I've been just saying, oh, it's this much. You make this much more if you go to college every year for 4 years, 5 through 45. 40 years, you're going to make this much more every year. I just give it to you. But in real life, when you do these things, you've got to actually come up with ways to measure these things by valuing the outputs and the inputs. And the problem is that we really want them to be accurate. It's not that easy to be accurate because people muck with markets. And things muck with markets, just the way things happen. We're just not able to actually charge for certain things, right? So if you're walking across a campus and it's really pretty, can I really charge for that? Can I charge for a beautiful sunset? And if I'm going to build a project that's going to ruin a beautiful sunset, how do I value the loss of that sunset? This gets very difficult. So that's really what we're trying to figure out here. So we're going to look at some examples. Normally we start with the private market. So normally what I do is I just call up something or look it up on the internet. How much is this cost, this input? How much does this sell for, this output? That's normally what I do, okay? But sometimes inputs or outputs are not traded. They don't go through markets, like pollution or the value of a pretty view of a sunset or the value of being able to go outside, okay? And then in other markets, the market price does not accurately measure value because we've mucked with it somehow. Something has happened. It's not a competitive market. There's somebody in there with too much power, or complainers have convinced us to alter market prices to be artificial, which they love to do. And minimum wage is the class example. We are seeing huge arguments over minimum wage, but when you artificially come in and say to someone, this is how much you must pay for inputs, you are essentially ignoring the value of that labor to that business. The business normally compensates labor based on what value that labor brings in. So if you're getting paid $15 an hour, what are you doing for this company that's earning them $15 an hour in profits? Because you got to pay for it. If you're working in a burger joint and you want $15 an hour, how much money are they making on each one of those burgers over and above the cost of keeping the store open, building the burger, right? Are you really adding $15 an hour versus $7 an hour or $8 an hour? That's really what we're saying. Businesses pay labor based on its value as far as the profits it's adding. And this is really the problem. People tend to lose sight of that. And what normally happens or is assumed is as we get more and more experience, then we add more value with our labor. We go to college because we will add more value, because we will learn skills and abilities and knowledge that will make us more productive. In a given hour, I will produce more. That's what you're saying. I will produce more profits. I will produce more value. So the idea is as we get more and more experience in the workplace, then we should be adding more and more value. Of course, when you get to be 60 and you're at your highest earning years, some people decide, oh, I could get someone at 25 to do the exact same thing and pay them half as much money. This is how we end up with age discrimination. Sometimes we have race or a gender discrimination. Is it really true that women add less value? Because unless that's the case, you should pay them equally. You should really be paying based on what they're bringing to the table. So with race and gender, it's very rare that that can be documented to be the case, that someone of a different race adds less value, so we should pay them less. So we tend to outlaw this type of thing. But again, what we're really trying to say is we want to value it at what's true and not what may necessarily be going on into a marketplace, because the market price is a problem. So we have to do some investigation before we can determine what the value of an input or output should be. So we got two types of problems. Either we don't have markets, or we have markets that are not accurately measuring value. Those are our options, right? So that's our problem. Now, to deal with these two problems, we have two different kind of options. We can use non-market valuation, where we try to just estimate what things are worth. Often we ask people, like, how much do you think this is worth? Are they going to be honest? Do they lie? Do they remember? I will think one day something is very valuable, and you do this too. And the next day, oh, I've lost interest in that. I don't want that at all. So it has no value. So we change, and we're fickle, and we lie. So determining value is not easy. That's why we love markets, because markets will instantaneously adjust to the information at hand, and it's not personal. They are not trying to reflect any one person's bias. They will just automatically adjust, and they will reflect value based on how we're all acting as we vote with our dollars. So that voting thing is very attractive to us because it's hard to make it wrong. It's hard for it to be wrong. So non-market valuation techniques are very often not replicatable and not particularly accurate. So people are not super fond of them sometimes. The other option is to use shadow pricing, where we try to adjust based on what information tells us is the broken thing and how they're valuing things. What's really broken here? Where's the problem? And let's just adjust that market price to account for that problem. Like, oh, we have some pollution. How much does that pollution cost us to clean up? Then we'll just adjust that market price by subtracting the cost of that cleanup. That's a very easy thing to do, and it's very palatable because you can actually get on and estimate these numbers by looking at the costs of cleanup. So it's very attractive versus just asking someone, oh, how much is that pollution? How much unhappy does that make you? How much would you pay to clean it up when they're not ever going to really pay? So the cost method is kind of nice, where you just go in and adjust the price by that cost of the negative that you're not accounting for, or some positive that you're not accounting for. Or another option we'll see next, where you actually go in and look at supply and demand and estimate where these curves are and figuring this out. Rather than estimating opinions, you estimate, well, what's the real willingness to pay in a market situation? So adjusting observed market prices really is something we're very interested in, and this is called shadow pricing. We can't get the true price, so we're going to try and shadow it by tracking what adjustments have to be made to make it accurate. So I guess that's where we get the word shadowing, but sometimes it's a confusing term because it's like, what does that actually mean, shadowing? So we're kind of following it around to see what's broken and then fix it by those little adjustments as we figure them out. So remember me saying that there was kind of distorting and correctings. Sometimes markets are distorted because there's some sort of regulations out there, or there's taxes, right? We're taxing things. Remember me saying whenever we're putting a tariff on something, we're simply saying this thing is more expensive. That is very distorting. That's not a resource. When a price goes up, we assume it's because the resources used to make that good or service are becoming more expensive because we're pulling them away from other things. And in order to pull them away, we have to pay them more. Hey, you come over here and help me over here. Oh, you don't want to? I'll pay you a little bit more. Then that resource will come over here and help me because what I'm doing is very valuable to society. And I'm there able, because of that, thereby able to pay more to bring them on down over here versus leaving them over there. So taxes and regulations simply are not adding any value. They're just commanding those resources where they're going to go. That's not really efficient, because how do people know? How do we know that we'd rather not have stuff from China? We want less stuff from China, so we're going to make it more expensive. We want less stuff from Mexico, so we're going to make it more expensive. Did we decide that? I'm not so sure we did. So I think there's a way to get us to buy more local products. I personally prefer local, and if there's something local, I will buy it if I can all afford it. But it's not because of taxes. It's because I have been convinced in NRAM 658 that local is better because it adds more to our local economy, so I'm willing to do it. That's not a distorting tax. I'm not being coerced. I'm simply willing to pay more for local. Therefore, more resources will go into local, and that makes us all better off at the community level. It's not about taxes or regulations by some outsider outside of my household telling me what to do. Another problem we have is when we have a non-competitive market where somebody's got a lot of power and they do things that don't really make us at that optimal equilibrium point that we want. In those two cases, we have two prices that are actually seen in that market. One that looks at demand and one that comes from supply. And remember, what we really liked was supply and demand being equal. Supply just equals demand, then everything is fine. And Adam Smith said in the 1700s, the invisible hand will get us right there. So we're going to talk a little bit about what price do you use based on these little problems we're pointing out. So lo and behold, one of the questions in assignment 5 is to go through this, and here we have the little pricing rule chart, right? So we say, what's the item to be valued? Is it an output or an input? So is it an input to the project where I need it to do the project, or is it what the project produces? So first you got to decide that. Then are we looking at the demand side, what people want and are willing to pay for, or are we looking at, is this something that the firms are providing? So you have to kind of get yourselves on these columns and rows, and then it will tell you exactly where you're supposed to be. And it probably is not going to make a lot of sense until we get to our examples. So for example, if you're valuing an input on a supply curve, you value it on the supply curve if it's coming from somewhere else. If I'm attracting it from over there, if I want laborers and I'm willing to pay more than the prevailing wage rate, and what am I going to pay? Well, how am I going to figure out that cost? I'm going to look at what it's going to cost me to get them from somewhere else. Because if the prevailing wage is at equilibrium and everybody that has a job needs a job at this wage rate, in order to get more workers, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to pay them more. How much more are you going to pay them? Well, you've got to look at where they are, where I'm going to get them from, and attract them over with that higher wage, because labor is an input. It's a resource. If we want to hire somebody really good, we're going to pay more. And we're going to get them from somewhere else. The mainland, another island, you pay them more, they will move. That's what it's basically saying. Something on that order. And output is the same thing. If I have something I'm making, why would you buy mine versus theirs? Right? Well, I can buy mine or I can buy theirs. When am I going to buy mine? When my price becomes attractive. So it's the price here that I've got, and I'm like, okay, so if the price over there is $2 and mine is $4, am I going to value my stuff at $4 or at $2? Because they can get all they want at $2. But mine is $4. Am I going to value it at $4 or $2? Well, I'm really competing with something that costs $2. So I'm going to value it at that alternative source. If I'm looking at, okay, so, you know, they can buy mine or yours. Which one are they going to buy? Well, if mine is more expensive than yours, they're going to buy yours. So you really need to be careful before you assume, well, mine will always be the preferred one, unless you had evidence that there's an unsatisfied demand for yours, then you have to really value it at the $2. Does that make sense? It's a bit confusing, but when you really think about, you walk into a market and you have two choices, you will start to understand these. But regardless, to answer that question, you can go to a page in the book that the FAQ gives you, and you can just see the table that looks kind of like this with more details. So let's just get started here with a graph so you can kind of see what the heck she's talking about. So here we have a labor market. So normally, of course, we'd be right here at equilibrium, right here at this center point. And everybody who wanted a job at this wage rate would have one. If I didn't want to pay that much, I'd be down here, and you would basically say, no, I'm not working for that wage. And we know people that say this. This is what I need to make, and this is how much I need to earn, and that's what I'm going to go for. Men in particular are better than this than women. I did a study with crafters one time, and the women were ready to work for less than minimum wage, but the men would work for something, wouldn't touch it for like 3 times minimum wage or something like that. They were very clear. I want to make a lot of money, and I'm going to set it up to make a lot of money. the women were like, oh, well, I don't really value my time. I'm watching TV, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, well, you set that expectation. You're going to be down here. You're going to be willing to supply for a very low wage rate. So the women are tending to be here and the guys are tending to be here because they're very clear. I need to make this much money. This is business. This is what my time's worth. So that's kind of the way it goes in real life. That's why you kind of set your own parameters without that expectation of being paid more. So you really should think about that because that's really what you're saying when you have a supply curve for labor. This is how much I need to supply this much work to you. And then on the demand side, it's downward sloping, right? Because the more and more you hire, the less and less you're willing to pay per person. That first person, that first amount of labor is worth quite a bit of money to you because you need to get started. And then it goes down, down, down. And we see this happening. Walmart greeters, no more Walmart greeters. Not adding any value. We're not willing to pay for them. They're done. Walmart has decided Walmart greeters not willing to pay. They don't add enough value. Who now has greeters? Has anybody noticed greeters anywhere else recently? I'm noticing some greeters at my Ross's, my local Ross store. This guy is so friendly at my local Ross store. It's just sickening how friendly he is. But that's all he does. Hi, welcome to Ross. Hi, welcome to Ross. Hi, welcome to Ross. And they pay him and he stands there and does that day after day, hour after hour, minute after minute. So for them, that greeter is adding value apparently, but for Walmart, not. So again, things change. Willingness to pay change for labor. So here we are at equilibrium and someone decides that a regulation needs to be implemented that distorts the wage rate in this market. And that is the minimum wage, WM. So if we institute WM as the minimum wage, again, as I said before, the amount of employment goes down. We used to hire here, and now we're hiring less. Fewer people at a higher wage. So the people that got the job are doing better. And then we have this group between this and this. Let me see, I could probably drop a line. So this right here, this amount here is the reduction in employment. That fewer hours and people, employees, corresponding with those hours will not be hired. So we've actually had less employment, but those who are employed are better off. They make more money. So again, it's not necessarily a Pareto preferred position, but somehow we're convinced it's better. And then let's say we have a new project because we have some unemployment now, right? We're not at full employment. Here, everybody who wanted a job and was willing to work got one. These people want a job, but they're not willing to work at the wage rate that's being offered, right? These people right here, here's what they're willing to offer, but here's what these people want. So they're not willing to work for those women. Here, everybody that was willing to work at that wage rate got a job. We've stopped that market from being efficient, and now we're up here. So if this market is inefficient and we have a project coming in and it says, oh, I'm going to provide employment to 25 people, that's great, but how do we value that employment, right? Because that's a benefit to our community, that we're hiring people that are, needing jobs, right? And I've heard of this out in Waianae. They gave me this story one time where it was like, oh yeah, we let Ko'olina go in, but we told them that they had to hire people from the Leeward Coast because we have an unemployment problem. So they had an unemployment problem. Here, in fact, we have this unemployment problem right here. Some people that had jobs now don't have them. So we're going to have 25 new jobs. What are the value to the community of those 25 new jobs? Well, whatever you're paying those people. But what wage rate are you going to actually pay? This becomes the question. Because, again, the group that is employed right here was willing to work at wage WA. So you're saying the value of their wages in their eyes is WA, right? But if you're going from someone up here, which the people up here, are they technically unemployed? No, they're technically not unemployed. They're saying the value of my labor is greater than you're willing to pay. So they're going to go to some other market where they're willing to pay more. So, oh, I'll come work for you if you pay me up here. But if you don't, I'll go work somewhere else. So you have two different workers you could be attracting. You could attract the unemployed, which is the group that's willing to work for a very cheap wage rate, but somehow got fired, right? Because we didn't need them, because we couldn't pay them, because we didn't earn enough money to pay them. Or you got this group up here, which is doing something else. But if you pay them more, they'll attract. So that really becomes the issue here. How are you going to value those new employees? And that becomes the question when you actually do this benefit cost analysis, because if the person is in this group, they're hardcore unemployed, and that's who you want them to employ, then you can value them at wage rate WA, because that's what they're willing to work for here, right? They're willing to work for WA. But if you want to hire these people up here that are already employed somewhere else, you're going to have to pay them more to get them to leave that job and come over to me. So for that group, if we're attracting those people, we're going to pay them WN. And sure enough, when the community negotiated agreement with Ko'olina to hire people from the leeward side, what they had in their minds was that they were going to hire hardcore unemployed from Waianae. But who did they actually hire? If they were hiring hardcore Waianae unemployed, they may not be demanding high wages, but there may be other issues with them. They may have some quality problems, right? And because I'm paying minimum wage anyway, their value may be at WA because they're hardcore unemployed. They have a hard time getting work. They have very little experience, right? But if I've got to pay the minimum wage up here, then I'm probably going to hire this person who also lives in the Leeward Coast, but now works in Waikiki, has experience, knows how to show up to work on time, and on and on. So they are in fact worth WM. So this person I'm going to value at WM, and this hardcore unemployed person I'm going to value at WA. So it really depends on what person gets the job. So the people in Waianae were so frustrated when they talked to me that, well, they didn't hire the unemployed. They just hired people from the Leeward Coast. I said, but that's what you said they could do. Well, but we thought they'd hired unemployed from Waianae. I said, well, if you've got to pay above minimum wage because it's the law, are you going to hire someone who's really only worth wage WA, and then you're going to have to deal with the problems? Or are you going to hire someone who really has the ability to command this wage rate, has experience, doesn't need to be trained, doesn't need to have any kind of assistance getting to work on time or any of this stuff, knows how to act, doesn't need training, doesn't need any kind of even, certifications because they're already food safe certified or whatever you're doing in that place. Of course, they hired the people from alternate jobs. So they needed to be valuing at WA. And the community was completely dumbfounded because they never really realized the implications of a minimum wage. I said, if you're hiring hardcore unemployed, you're usually getting some sort of training wage in there as a subsidy for you to try to get them up to speed so that they can compete in this workplace without becoming discouraged. And it's not that they're bad people, they just need to be work ready. So you might want to not expect them to hire at WM because there's a distorting minimum wage, but actually give them the ability to do a training wage. So that's the type of stuff that you actually run into with these projects, because these businesses will come in and everybody is like, oh, employment. Let me just give you another example. So when we out at Kapolei, when they were putting in this new Ho'opili, I think it was, this housing development. Oh, it's going to give so many jobs. I said, well, what kind of jobs is it going to give? Well, it's going to give some temporary construction jobs. I said, yes, but temporary construction jobs could be going anywhere. We could retrofit existing buildings. We could take hotels and make them into small apartments. We could renovate run-down buildings. We could build on top of parking garages, any of that stuff. That would also generate construction jobs. So building housing anywhere is going to do that. So it's not just out there that it's good. And then secondly, they're saying, oh, we're going to also build these retail stores and we're going to have all these clerk jobs. And I said, well, but the problem is you're going to have clerk jobs. A, who wants to be a clerk? B, a lot of the people that are going to be moving out there are going to be people that now live in town. So they're going to buy all their stuff in town. So they move out there, they're going to buy more of their stuff out there. So you're going to have the jobs, sales jobs that used to be downtown, essentially moving out there. Because we're not going to really buy more stuff. We're just going to be housed somewhere differently. We're not really talking about new populations. We're just saying, oh, we're going to move out of our parents' house and we're going to move out there. So we're going to spend the same at Longs, but the Longs will be out there rather than in town. But again, if you're not very sophisticated at really valuing that labor and wondering where it's coming from and what type of jobs those are and what they're really going to add to the economy, because you don't know what the jobs are really yielding as far as family incomes, and we get into these discussions. So the minimum wage one is really hot now because everybody thinks that we can just mandate wages. The thing is that wages should be connected with how productive you are. When that's broken, then we have a problem. But to just simply force someone to pay an individual a certain wage is kind of a difficult thing to really assume that we're going to get an accurate reflection of the value of their marginal product. And this demand curve really is the value of their marginal product. And we're willing to pay what they're worth. And you're basically telling me that I have to pay them more whether they're worth it or not. You will see, again, as I've said, in Seattle and San Francisco, low-end restaurants have gone out, and now all we're left is high-end restaurant with high-end waiters and waitresses, mostly waiters, just have to say that. So did that really help? Is that better? Because we've now changed the structure of the economic picture because of this problem of trying to value wages and dictate the value of wages. So this is kind of some of the stuff we run into and why we're even talking about this. And there is a minimum wage question. So if you're drawing it from an alternative market, you value it at WM. If you're taking it from existing unemployed people, they're really down here because that's really, you know, this last person here is the one you want to hire, right? Because that's the person who got unemployed, just on the other side of this dotted line. Does it make sense? Okay, one more time. If Laurel, you have a question? Okay.
No, sorry. I think I just turned my video on for a second.
Yeah, you came on my screen, so I thought maybe you had a problem. So
no, sorry.
If labor was otherwise employed, you would have valued it WM, and if they were unemployed, it would be WA, right? So the net benefit in the first case would be the output value. So this is what the benefits you get for the output, and here's the labor cost minus the wage rate times the amount of hours. Does that make sense? And then in the next case, the wage rate drops, right? Because it's cheaper labor. Okay, so let's just start talking about tariffs because I blah, blah, blah. Let's just see what this would look like because we actually have a problem where we have tariffs and subsidies on certain things. So if you're importing goods, the assumption is that the supply curve is flat, that you can import anything at that import price, which is PW. This is what China does. Like they produce all this cheap stuff, they import it. It never, you know, they just can keep on cranking it out and we just can keep shipping it in. So it's considered to be a flat demand curve as much as you want at this price because you're in international markets, stuff flows very freely. There's a lot of activity. So this is a normal assumption that you would see. And then this is the domestic market. Because the domestic market is smaller with limited producers, then that thing slopes up to the right. So this is really, if you were just using domestic stuff, and this is why we see Trump wants to do tariffs, because here's what the domestic suppliers do and here's what the importers do. So in every case, after this point right here, the importers will win because their stuff is always going to look cheaper. So you'll buy the import before you'll buy American, because American is more expensive. Because Americans is here, import is here, it's cheaper. So what do? We decide we're going to put a tariff on. And the tariff is the difference between PB and PW. So this right here, this part right here, is that tariff. So that means that this becomes more expensive. This is why we do it, to make that import more expensive and reduce that difference between American and imported. That's what we do. And that is distorting. Because how do you value this thing? You really, the value then becomes PB. It's not, still doesn't necessarily come off the supply curve. It really comes off this intersection on the demand curve right here, right? We're really going to buy this much. And we really don't care if it's an American or Chinese. That's how much we're going to buy, because the Chinese is cheaper. So it's distorting. So if you're going to build a factory locally to supply more of this thing, how are you going to value this output? We really would think, if we're going to produce more, that this is the true picture. This is where we should be on the American supply curve. But if we're down here, we've basically got this tariff distorting things and telling us that this is the value. But what we really want is a value that represents all the resources we used up, not something that's an artificial construct that is import price plus tariff. But we can at least adjust for that and try and get back to what is it really as far as using up resources. This one is the picture of the international resources it used up, and this is a picture of the national resources we used up. So if an international firm comes in here and wants to supply more of this thing, we're still back to this original supply curve. The tariff is not something that's a used up resource. So we got to fix that, because an American firm is not going to enter this market. There's no way they're making money. They're not going to make money. They're not going to be attracted to this market. Price is below equilibrium. Everybody that's there already is already, this group right here is already doing everything they can do, and these people up here are not going to make money. They're not going to enter the market. The only people going to enter this market is foreigners, because they're out here, right? Their costs are here, so they can afford to enter the market. So we have to understand that and not assume that, oh, tariffs are going to result in more American firms necessarily. Not in this case. So this is an example of how distorting this can all be. Here's an example of a subsidy. So let's say it's for farmers who are going to subsidize diesel fuel. We actually do subsidize their water. Farmers get cheap water, and consumers get very expensive water. So what you're doing is, you're saying the price of this input is here, but I'm giving you a subsidy, so I'm making decisions as if it's down here. But this is a distortion. I should really be pricing here, because that's the actual cost of the water to society. But I'm going to think it's down here, so I'm going to want to use this price because this is artificially set. So what I'm going to want to do is include that subsidy when I value that water, because to the community, if we're using that water, we need to use the full price, not the subsidized price. The subsidized price does not reflect to the community the value of that water. And this is a problem we have, because farmers in Hawaii get subsidized water, but water is very expensive to us. So every time we subsidize them, that's a problem. So if we want to expand agriculture, be careful, because we're really not charging them full price now. So we are in fact subsidizing their water. So it's even more expensive to bring more local agriculture here than we thought. Is this making sense? Any questions? Because we're almost done. I know it's getting a little tedious, but I just wanted to run you through some examples of this kind of distorting case. And here's kind of some monopoly cases. Remember I said, you know, somebody has power. So this is a demand for labor by a monopoly. So I'm the only employer in town. This is my demand curve, the value of the marginal product, right? But because I'm the only employer, I'm actually gonna be hiring using this curve, the marginal revenue product. Where I'd really like to be is out here. If this was a perfectly competitive market, I'd be right here where the value of the marginal product equals supply. But if I'm the only buyer, I actually make more profits if I stop right here. This is why we don't like monopolies. They stop here and we want to be here. So in this case, we might want to force them to produce more because they have an unfair monopoly and they are stopping here instead of stopping here. So this is a case where we'd really like to be at this price, right? Because this is the wage rate we want, but we may be at this wage rate because they're just not hiring what's optimal from society's point of view because they have power to control the market. And when they control the market, they will stop here. And you see, it'll be a higher wage rate, but a much smaller employment, just like the minimum wage problem. They're going to keep that wage rate artificially high. So that's what's going on, and that's why we don't like monopolies. So when we don't let these AT&T, no, what is it? T-Mobile and not Verizon. Never did figure out the other one. But when we have these mergers of these phone things, we don't like it because it will give them monopoly power. And what will happen? We will end up seeing bigger charges from phones for phones service, either the phones or the service. Why are they doing it? Because they're not making as much money alone as they would make if they joined together and became one powerful company. So we have a chat. So Sprint. Thank you, Laurel. T-Mobile and Sprint. Yes, they want to merge and we're preventing it because we think it's going to give us this mess here. And that's not optimal because we'll be back here with this high rate when we would be better off here where we would employ more resources because we really would like to see more going in here. We'd really like to be here, increase production, and get those rates lower. That's what we want. So that's why they're telling them no, because they're going to cause a problem. So this is, in fact, a correcting situation by telling them no. We're really trying to correct a future problem. So that's what we're really talking about here. So we got a lot more here, but okay. So this is kind of the same thing that I just gave you. But again, this is also in your book, and I give you the page in the FAQ where it actually points you to an example. And actually in your homework, I think there's a question of subsidy or taxes. So you have to say, okay, how would I correct the price? And I'm asking you to give me a formula. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is again distortionary, and these are corrective. So if it's distortionary, that means it's moving us further away from equilibrium. We're doing some action, whether it's a tax or a subsidies that moving us away from equilibrium, like minimum wage or price controls of some sort on rental housing or gas prices. We see this. Or if we're correcting, we're trying to solve a problem like, tobacco tax, for example. Why do we have a tobacco tax? Because there's a lot of expenses associated to the community of smoking. So what we want to do is discourage smoking, but does it help if we tell people not to smoke? Does it help if I tell you not to do something? If I tell you not to do something, what's the first thing you do? You do it. I'm not listening to you. You can't tell me what to do. You're not my mama. You can't be telling me what to do. You need to let me do what I want. That's how I was, and I'm still kind of like that. First thing that riles me is when you start telling me what I'm not supposed to be doing. So there's this human thing where we don't like to be told what to do. So what you can actually do is tax, and people will smoke less. And then we will all be burdened less from the bills associated with smoking. So that tax is really solving a negative externality of smoking. It causes all sorts of social problems, pollution for one thing, also causes a lot of incidences where people can't take care of themselves because they get these respiratory diseases, which are very expensive to treat. And so those are expensive for us, and the society has to bear this burden. So reduce that burden, we reduce the number of smokers, but rather than tell them what not to do, if you just tax them, they will stop. If you make smoking more expensive, they will stop it. And now we're starting to control vaping. That'll be the next thing, because there's externalities associated with vaping. It's hard on you. It's not good to be doing it in front of, around other people. It gets in their airspace. So we're now going to look at taxing that. So that's really what we're doing. Okay, so I've been through all this in words, but we're done with our time. So I want to stop sharing. I'll post this PowerPoint also, and I'm going to try and get these YouTubes. But that is, again, chapter 5, and I pointed you at every question on how to answer it and why it's answered like that, and the FAQ also gives you hints. So anybody has any last questions before we end the meeting?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, and then everybody in this call is turning stuff in. I see it. Laurel, email me if you have, because I still see you haven't resubmitted one. So keep on keeping on. Laurel's been communicating with me very well, trying to get through all this. And Keith, you're doing very well. I think you're furthest ahead of the graduate students.
I got another submission for you too.
Yeah, well, 3 is very easy. So rest assured, those of you who've not gotten to 3, it goes pretty quickly. And then 4 is a little hairy and 5 is a little hairy. But if you just keep with me, keep following up with your questions, I'll make sure you get through it. And again, what I'm striving for is trying to get you to understand the importance of how do we value inputs and outputs, because it will make or break these NPVs. And people are very naive sometimes in the way they value things. I mean, I'm sure you never thought this minimum wage thing was such a, why is this bad? It sounds so wonderful. But at the end of the day, there is an impact when you start controlling what employers have to pay. It does reduce the jobs. Personally, I think we need more training programs and encouragement for workers to try and get them tuned up to be entering markets where there's a bigger demand for services and that they have the skills to meet that demand. Because there is a big demand for some positions. I mean, I think teachers, there's always a teacher shortage. There's always doctor shortages. I mean, we have a huge doctor shortage here. Huge. We cannot fill the demand for doctors. Just one example. Not that a McDonald's worker is like a doctor, but let's think that we're all capable of rising to new skills and new heights. Okay, any last questions before we end the meeting?
Did you see that you posted something about reinvestment rate, like a Excel sheet about reinvestment? I
posted it from the very beginning under webinars. They're all labeled. There's actually Excel spreadsheets, and I can also send it to you.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I'll send it to you, Laurel. I thought I did, but I can resend. It's fine. But it's also, if you look under the webinars, there's actually PowerPoints labeled Homework for Help. Chapter 2, Assignment Help.
Yeah, okay. I've seen those.
So, but I can send it to you again, because somehow people are not totally catching on with the reinvestment rate, it seems. So I've been sending that out a lot lately, but it was always up there, and I think I reposted it when I went over it. But again, I'm getting a little behind because we had a holiday. So I was spending most of my holiday helping people through their homework, because people are really starting to kick in now.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll end the meeting, and I'll send that, Laurel.
Thank you.
Okay, bye, everybody.